Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for registering and attending our Microsoft 365 Business Premium webinar. My name is Ian Davis. I'm Head of Technical Sales here at KIK ICT, and I will be hosting this 60-minute webinar. Delivering today's content is our marketing partner, as you can see from the slide there, a training company called Illuminate Learning, and I will soon pass you over to Andy to introduce himself and run through the deck. As I said, it will stick to the 60-minute slot we've got, and we will finish on that, if not before. And with that in mind, I'll literally close the call down at that 60-minute mark. A copy of the recording will be made available to everyone in attendance and for anyone who did register but haven't made it online. So with that time slot in mind, there is a Q&A function within the platform. I would encourage you to use that for any questions that you might have throughout the presentation. Please feel free to post them in the Q&A box. I will aim to answer these directly myself, to leave Andy just to continue to run the deck in the background. So I'll now pass you over to Andy. Again, thanks for your time. I hope you get some value out of what you're about to see. And over to you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Ian. Hope you can all hear me okay. As Ian said, my name is Andy Roberts. I work for a company called Illuminate Learning. We're a certified Microsoft training partner. And we're going to spend some time over the next hour or so talking about Microsoft 365 Business Premium and looking at some functionality that's included within Microsoft 365 Business Premium. As Ian said, any questions as we're going through, please feel free to use the Q&A function. There should be some time left at the end, so anything left over we can look at then. Having said that, there is quite a lot of stuff to go through here, so timing might be a little bit tight. There might be some stages where it seems like I'm rushing a little bit, but that's just to try and make sure we get as much covered in the hour session as we can do. So with that being said, let's crack on. This is the agenda for today. This is what we're going to be covering off. So we're having a quick introduction to Microsoft 365, looking at the world today, the situation that businesses find themselves in, and then we're going to look at some of the security functionality, some of the security applications that are included within the Microsoft 365 Business Premium bundle. A few sections there, as you can see, and then at the end there's a little summary and time for Q&A at the end as well. Okay, so the world has changed, and I'm sure this is something that you're all familiar with as well. Over the last 4 or 5 years, especially since the pandemic, everything has changed. Lots of people are spending loads more time working online or working remotely. Employees' expectations have probably changed. Quite often employees have an expectation that they'll be able to work remotely. Sometimes that they'll be able to work from their own devices rather than their corporately issued devices. So there's a lot more mobility now, there's a lot more collaboration, and yeah, the way we're working on a day-to-day basis for a lot of businesses really has changed. So what are some of the key challenges, the top challenges for small and medium-sized businesses? So like I said, employees are working from multiple locations. You might have smaller offices located around different geographical areas, or sometimes people might be working from home. So we need to make sure that we're providing an environment where our employees are able to access corporate information remotely, but in a secure way. So people are accessing our corporate information from all sorts of different devices, from all sorts of different locations. Like I said before, not just corporately issued laptops and phones, but maybe personal laptops and phones as well. So we need to figure out what we can do to enable our employees to be as productive and creative as they can be in their working environments. But at the same time, having all that flexibility also opens the risk of there being an increased phishing and ransomware attacks and other cyber threats like this. So we need to make sure we're doing all we can to make sure that we're reducing the likelihood of falling victim to any cyber attacks. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our costs aren't spiraling. Costs, more than ever, are really, really important, and we need to make sure that costs are not spiraling out of control. This guy here, Satya Nadella, he is the CEO of Microsoft. And he's got a quote here, and I'm just going to focus on the bit that's in bold: do more with less. So this is Microsoft's vision. This is what they're trying to help their customers to achieve: do more with less. So basically what that means is they want you to be able to do all the sorts of things you need to do in your work environment to make it accessible and enable all that collaboration and everything like this, but of course keeping everything really, really secure as well. So doing more with less is to do with allowing your employees, your colleagues to access everything they need to access, but of course making sure all those strict security rules are in place as well, so that nothing is ever compromised in your corporate environment. These are the different Microsoft 365 license suites for SMBs, starting with Business Basic on the left-hand side and Business Standard in the middle. And you'll see with Business Premium on the right-hand side, that includes everything that's included in Business Standard. So all of your cloud services and your desktop productivity apps, Excel, etc., etc., etc. But on top of that, we have the comprehensive security layer as well. So that's the key difference between Business Premium and Business Standard. All of the comprehensive security features that are included in Business Premium, things like Intune for mobile device management, Azure information protection, Azure virtual desktops, Microsoft Defender. These are all things we're going to talk about in some more detail over the next 45 minutes or so. Now, people think of Microsoft probably mainly as being a software company, or you could say it's a productivity company because it helps people become productive at work. But really, at its core, Microsoft is a security company. That's the key thing that Microsoft is, right? It's really, really important that all of its applications are secure, that all of your corporate data is protected at all times as well. So really kind of have that mindset, and we'll talk about that a bit more as we go through this presentation. Microsoft really is a security-focused company. It enables you to have the collaboration with things like Teams, where you have your group chat and your video conferencing, and also access to your SharePoint files, and maybe telephony systems, and maybe app integrations into other systems as well. We have security and access, protected identity through things like MFA or multi-factor authentication, and conditional access. And if you don't know what that is, that's something we'll cover off in a few minutes' time. We have top grade defense against cyber threats and data loss with things like Microsoft Defender for Office 365 and Microsoft Defender for Business, and Azure information protection. And again, if that's something you're not familiar with, then we will cover it off. And we have the ability to easily secure and manage devices through the Intune application, which again is something we'll talk about as we progress through this slideshow. So the top benefits of Business Premium: it's comprehensive and it's easy to use. So there are lots of security features bundled into Business Premium, but because it all comes under that Microsoft umbrella, there's lots of similarities in how you manage them all. It's a lot less complicated than having lots and lots of different vendors for maybe managing your mobile devices, or a different vendor for multi-factor authentication, or a different vendor for your antivirus. Okay, if you have all of those different vendors for all of those different tasks, it can become quite a complex scenario. So it's one solution which really enables your IT staff to learn it quicker, to be familiar with how it works, which means they can be more productive as well. It's also really simple to get set up. There are kind of out-of-the-box wizards and onboarding options that mean this stuff is really easy to kind of set up in the first place as well. Reduces costs by eliminating the requirement to have all those additional third-party providers as well. So that might sound a bit counterintuitive, because obviously Business Premium costs more than Business Standard. But if you look at the price increase, if you compare that to all the costs you might be paying for mobile device management or antivirus or anything else, if you do a maths exercise to add up what you're paying for functionality from third-party applications, which is actually included in Business Premium, nearly always there's quite a significant cost benefit to you in that case. And of course, another big thing not to kind of overlook is it really eases the license complexity in this situation as well. So rather than having all these different vendors, you just have Microsoft, which means you don't have to worry quite so much about all the different renewals, all the different licenses that you have, and it's all kind of under one umbrella instead. And last but not least, on the right hand side, what you get within Microsoft Business Premium, it's almost exactly the same as the features you get within the E5, the top level enterprise level software as well. Excuse me, put my teeth back in. Enterprise level license that Microsoft offer. So you're getting the same functionality that large multinational organizations are getting. So there's huge, really security focused multinational organizations are using this technology, and it's the same technology that you get access to if you move over to Business Premium. This slide here looks a little bit busy, but the key point on this slide is that if you look on the left-hand side, in that first column, that is what was included in Microsoft Business Premium when it first came out back in 2017. And today, you'll see a lot has changed. So there's a lot more included now than there was, what's that, 7 years ago? So if you have considered moving to Business Premium in the past and you decided that it wasn't the right solution for you at that time, it might be worth revisiting it and just having another look at all the additional stuff that is included in Business Premium now. Are there any areas where you could maybe look to implement an application or functionality within Business Premium, which would either be new to your business and provide you with an extra layer of security, or it could maybe replace one of those third-party applications you're using to complete the same task at the moment. Okay, so Microsoft 365 increases security confidence, and now we're going to have a look at some of the main cyber threats that affect all businesses, not just SMBs. So phishing, and I think this is a term which I suspect most people on the call here are familiar with, and I think if you're being honest, most people have probably fallen victim to, or at least come very close to falling victim to. It's certainly a big thing at this time of year in the run up to Christmas, when there's lots of deliveries being made, and you might receive an email or a text message from a company that's claiming to be Every or DHL or something like this, and the message they send you might look authentic. There might just be a small typo in a URL somewhere, or there might just be something that doesn't quite look right. But somebody's basically pretending to be someone else, and they're trying to get you to believe that they're from that authentic source, and then hand over some of your personal information. Okay, it could be personal information to you. It could be your work password or a password to another application. And you might think, well, even if I'm just doing this on my own kind of personal device, if I hand over my password, is that going to be a problem to my business? Well, potentially it could be, because how many people have different passwords for all the different applications they use? Probably not many. How many people have kind of the same password or a variation of the same password that they use for everything, personal stuff and work stuff? Essentially quite a few. So if you're using, if you get caught up in a phishing attack just in your personal life even, you could hand over your password, and then potentially a user could use that information to hack into information that's kind of held within your corporate world as well. So phishing attacks are something that's very real, something that we see a lot of, and definitely something that you need to be aware of. And of course, there is functionality within Business 365 Premium that will help us to avoid these sorts of phishing attacks in our business. And again, we come on to that and talk about that a little bit later. Another key cyber threat is ransomware. And this is where essentially hackers use encryption against you. So they hack into your corporate environment, they encrypt some or all of your data, and then they demand that you pay them money or Bitcoin or something for them to then unencrypt and you regain access to your information. There was a very famous example of this back in 2017. There was something called the WannaCry virus, where lots of businesses around the world were impacted by this. And one of the biggest victims was the NHS here in the UK, where many of their devices, laptops, PCs, were infected by the WannaCry virus, and data was encrypted, and it caused all sorts of big problems. Now, an interesting thing about the WannaCry virus was that Microsoft detected it before it became a problem, and it deployed patches to all of the devices on the latest version of the operating system, essentially. So any device that was on the latest version of the operating system did not have an issue with WannaCry virus. It wasn't a problem. The only devices that were impacted were ones that were running much older versions of the OS, XP and Vista and stuff like this. And for some reason, there were lots and lots of devices across the NHS which hadn't been updated. So that teaches us two things. When you're told to keep your software up to date and patched, etc., 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 there are reasons for it. It really is a key thing that you do. And the second thing it shows us is that Microsoft has access to huge amounts of data, and it does lots of proactive work to try and make sure that all of their devices are patched and that people don't fall victim to these kind of attacks. And again, later on, we talk a bit more about that huge scale and that huge size that Microsoft can take advantage of, which really helps it become a leader in the defense against cyber attacks. So security is top of mind for many customers. It says here there's been a 300% year-on-year increase on ransomware attacks, with more than half of those attacks aimed at small businesses. So don't just think this is a problem for big businesses. There are people out there trying to hack into your system, essentially. 70% of SMBs think that cyber threats are becoming more of a business risk. I think that number is too low. Surely I should think, if you're in charge of IT, of cybersecurity for your organization, this is a big issue for you. Surely you know that this is going to be potentially a big problem. And it says 70% of SMBs think that it's becoming more of a risk. I think it should be 100%. You need to make sure that you're on top of this stuff, because this really is a true example of when prevention is better than the cure. It's so much better to be on top of things and doing everything you can to prevent these sort of attacks than it is to try and recover from them after they've happened, because that can be a real pain point for any business. And why is it a problem? Well, basically because there's big money in it. And a thing that has maybe changed as well recently over the last 5 or 10 years or so is that people's visions in their mind of hackers was probably somebody who was very, very technical, somebody who was very, very geeky, who was writing all sorts of code to be able to hack into a system somewhere. That's not really the case anymore. Anyone can maybe not do the hacking themselves, but hackers for hire is a real thing. And if you've got access to the dark web, and if you know what to search for, you can really easily find somebody who will hack into an organization system for you, and they get paid for it. So that's why it's a big thing. People are earning money from it essentially. So don't make assumptions that you're not going to fall victim to this. Every business, no matter what size, needs to be aware that cyber threats are a real issue. And like I said before, prevention is so much better than cure in this situation. So, as I mentioned, Microsoft is big. It's one of the biggest technology organizations in the world. And because it's big, it can take advantage of some of the things that you can see here. 62 trillion threat signals analyzed every day, 32 billion email threats blocked annually. These are huge numbers. And this is basically showing us that Microsoft has the ability to analyze all this data, to monitor what's going on out there in the big wide world, to detect areas where there might be a problem, to apply fixes and patches and software updates and everything like that to help protect your business from these sorts of issues. In the yellow there at the top right, Microsoft is investing $20 billion over the next 5 years to improve and share knowledge and gain insights around combating cybercrime. Not many businesses are in a state where they can invest that kind of money, where they have that kind of backing, I suppose, to invest in these sorts of things. So it just goes to show you that Microsoft is, like I mentioned, at its heart, a security company, and investing in security and defending against cyber threats really is a top priority for the Microsoft business and for all of its customers across the world. So Microsoft really does have a unique vantage point on security and intelligence and everything else that's going on. And again, these numbers are huge. I'm not going to go over them again, but it's just a key thing to remember is that Microsoft has access to so much data that it's monitoring and analyzing all the time, and that really helps it to become best in breed, a real leader in the antivirus and the security space. But you don't have to just take my word for it. You don't take Microsoft word for it. There is a host of different industry analyst reports that back this sort of stuff up as well. So if you're the sort of person that likes spending time reading analyst reports, you can go to Gartner, you can go to Forrester, you can go to IDC, and you can have a look at what they're saying about Microsoft. And it really is a leader in all sorts of these different spaces as well. So like I said, it's enterprise grade, top level security from Microsoft, all bundled into that package if you're moving over to the Microsoft Business Premium license model. So these are the key security features included in Microsoft 365 Business Premium. I'll just touch on them now because we go into them in more detail over the next few slides. But Intune, which gives us the ability to manage and configure mobile devices, but also PCs and Macs, and we can potentially apply some rules to those devices as well, and configure some settings that get applied to those devices. We have something called information protection, which applies an extra layer of protection to Office documents, Word files, PowerPoint presentations that we're working on, and we can set some really strict rules around who can access those documents, even if they're emailed out of our organization onto somebody else. There's something called conditional access, which allows us to enforce multi-factor authentication rules to people when they're accessing certain applications or certain pieces of data from, for example, different locations. So it could be the case that if somebody's trying to get onto your SharePoint site from within your corporate environment, from within your office, they don't have to re-authenticate to access SharePoint. But if they're working from home, or if they're on a mobile device or something like that, then you might want to enforce an additional multi-factor authentication rule, just to add that little extra layer of protection. Azure Virtual Desktop, that gives you the ability to access Windows desktops on any device. So it doesn't need to be a Windows device. It could be a Mac, or it could be an iPad or an Android tablet. With Azure Virtual Desktop, you can use any of those devices to access a Windows desktop and use it like a Windows device. Defender for Business, this is the antivirus part, which helps us to protect against ransomware and phishing attacks and the things we were talking about a little bit before. Defender for Office 365. This is where we, again, have a look at some of the things we can do to prevent people from clicking on malicious links within emails and little things like that as well. And then Cloud App Security just gives us a bit of visibility into the different applications that people are using on the devices that they're also using to access work stuff. So it could be the case that if we identify that somebody's got loads of, I don't know, BitTorrent download applications on their laptop, we might decide that that laptop is not an appropriate laptop to be accessing our work environment, because if they're downloading stuff from BitTorrent sites, then who knows what could be running on that person's PC. And we'll look at all of these things in a little bit more detail. So protecting against lost or stolen passwords with multi-factor authentication. So the biggest risk to your business is somebody getting access to one of your users' usernames and passwords. And passwords are the biggest risk, basically. If you're just using a simple username and password authentication method for people to get into your system, that's the biggest risk that you'll face. And the easiest thing you can do to reduce that risk is to implement multi-factor authentication. You can see here it says on the right, multi-factor authentication prevents 9.9% of identity attacks, so a huge number of them, rather than just people using a username and password. Now, hopefully, every organization you work within has already implemented a multi-factor authentication process. And there's lots of different ways of doing this. You can have the Microsoft Authenticator app, where maybe if you try to access a certain application, you're just prompted the Authenticator app on your phone and put in a little code or something like this. Windows Hello, not everyone kind of recognizes that name, but what Windows Hello is, it's the biometric functionality that's built into Windows. If you open up your laptop and it recognizes your, or if you put in your fingerprint, and it then unlocks the laptop rather than you having to type in your password, that is a more secure method, because the laptop, Windows, knows it's me. It can identify the attributes of my face, rather than it being anybody that's just got access to my password. The FIDO2 security key it mentions there, that's like an NFC key, basically. So it will unlock your laptop if one of these NFC keys is close to it. Other biometrics, other things you can see there, like the tokens as well. So the soft token might be like a single use code you get on an application that gives you access to something, or a hard token might be a separate hardware key fob, which has a token on it, again, which you might need to authenticate to get into certain places. So implementing passwordless technology and that multi-factor authentication is singly the biggest thing that you can do to prevent unsolicited people from accessing your corporate information. And there are, of course, tools within Microsoft 365 Premium that will help you do this. Conditional access, I talked about a bit previously. So this is where you can restrict access to corporate resources based off of certain criteria. So in the scenario we've got here, we've got somebody who's trying to access our Azure cloud or maybe some of our corporate applications from their device. With conditional access, you can basically say, okay, we can either allow access straight away, we could block access altogether, or we can enforce multi-factor authentication based on a number of different parameters. So the example I used before, if they're on an unknown Wi-Fi network and they're trying to connect through to your corporate environment, that is a situation where you might want to enforce that multi-factor authentication. But if you know they're already connected to your, they might be connected to your actual physical network in your office, or they're connected to your corporate Wi-Fi in your office, in that situation, you might not want to apply those multi-factor authentication rules because you know that's pretty much a trusted person in a trusted location. So multi-factor authentication could be something, you know, quite powerful. I've heard many people actually complaining about multi-factor authentication, saying that the issue you have issues with it asking you to re-authenticate time and time again. That's not really an issue with multi-factor authentication as such. That's an issue with how it's actually been set up. And there are things you can do that basically mean you only have to re-authenticate, or you only have to authenticate with multi-factor authentication once a day or something like this, depending on where you are. So if you're having issues with multi-factor authentication, or if it's not something that you've even thought about setting up yet and you haven't applied any conditional access rules, speak to the team at Kick ICT and I'm sure they'll be able to help you out in this area. Azure Virtual Desktops, again, this is the ability to access a Windows desktop on any device. There are use cases where this might be useful. You know, maybe somebody's accessing trying to access one of your work application on a low spec device, and it doesn't have the processing power required to run that application. Well, if you hosted that application in an Azure Virtual Desktop, they would just have to open up the Azure Virtual Desktop app on their device, and then a new Windows screen opens up within the browser. They can access that application and they can use it. And then in that case, of course, the processing power required is on the server where the application is running, not on the local device, not on the local laptop. Okay. If you're using RDS, remote desktop services currently, then it's definitely worth considering moving those workloads over from RDS to an Azure Virtual Desktop system instead. It's quite a lot cheaper is the first thing. I think with RDS, there are 3 different licenses you need. You need a license for the operating system and for RDS and something else as well. But with Azure, it's just that one license which is bundled into Business Premium with the Azure Virtual Desktop. So again, definitely something worth looking at. Like I mentioned, it can be supported in all sorts of different types, not just on Windows devices, but also Androids and Macs and iOS devices as well. Anything that runs an HTML5 browser, essentially, you can run an Azure Virtual Desktop on. An Azure Virtual Desktop is available in all these different licenses. It's included in all of these different licenses, but the key one we're looking at is the one that's halfway down that list there, Microsoft 365 Business Premium. So if you're using Business Premium, then you have access to Azure Virtual Desktops already. And if you're using Business Premium and you didn't know you had access to Azure Virtual Desktops, then again, that's another great reason to engage with the guys at Kick ICT, have a conversation with them about situations where you might be able to benefit from accessing applications through Azure Virtual Desktop, or maybe giving other users access to Azure Virtual Desktop as well. Okay, defending against cyber threats and data loss. So within Business Premium, there's something called ATP Safe Links. ATP stands for Advanced Threat Protection. And basically what that means is that, as I mentioned before, Microsoft has got access to huge amounts of data that it can analyze. It uses that data to kind of identify websites that might be malicious. It might identify that there's some kind of strange code on that website, or it might have been blacklisted by somebody, or something might have happened somewhere which basically identified that website as being malicious. And if one of your users tries to go to that link, either by typing it in the browser or by clicking on a link within an email or a Teams chat or whatever it might be, when that link opens, what actually happens is it gets blocked, and you see a screen like the one you can see here, and it's saying that opening this website might not be safe. We recommend you do not open the website, as it might not be safe and could harm your computer or result in malicious use of your personal data. And it says close this page, and you'll notice underneath that it says continue anyway, not recommended. And you might think, well, that's not great, because you don't want people to continue to that site. And actually, as the administrator, you have the ability to get rid of that continue anyway option. So you could just say this has been marked as malicious. You don't give people the option to continue to that site. And then, of course, if somebody really does need to get to that site for a legitimate reason, then they'll contact you, and you can maybe look at whitelisting that site or providing an exception for that site. But this is a really good kind of first barrier that you have to protect your organization from people clicking on those links, either by accident, or they might be falling victim to a phishing attack or something like that. So yeah, it's just that first layer of defense you have against people accessing those sorts of sites. Information protection, Azure Information Protection, AIP. What this is, basically with Azure Information Protection, you have the ability to apply a default sensitivity level across all of the documents that are created within your organization. And you can see in that orange highlighted area at the top of the screenshot there, it's got here the default is being set as general. Okay, but you could say you want your default level to be confidential or highly confidential or something like that. And basically what that means, you can then decide who will have access to that document. So if it's marked as a confidential document, you can say only people within this document can access this document, or only these specifically named people can access this document. And then if that document gets downloaded and forwarded on to somebody else, if that person tries to open it, if they're not one of the people that's specifically been given access to that file, or if they're not in a team of people that specifically got access to that file, then they won't be able to open it. It will come up with a message saying, information protection is kicked in, you don't have access to this file. So even if it's been downloaded and forwarded to you, you won't have access, because that extra layer of protection that's included within AIP, or Azure Information Protection. So this is really quite a powerful feature for organizations who work with really, really sensitive information, sensitive data. And again, something just to be kind of aware that that it exists and it's part of that Business Premium package. Also, you can see on the screenshot here, it comes up with a watermark that says secret. Now you can change what that watermark says, and you could put something which is relevant or personal to individual people that are looking at that document. And essentially, if I were to pick up my phone or my camera and take a picture of that sensitive document and think, here's a way of getting around these sensitivity labels, I'm going to take a photo of it and send it to somebody else. Well, if they do that, then the watermark can be used to clearly identify who's done it, basically, who was the guilty party who took that photo and leaked that information to somebody else. So Azure Information Protection, again, really something which is quite useful. I've seen it being used in a few organizations already, and it's something which is really quite powerful. If you're thinking about deploying Copilot, going a little bit off topic here, but if you're looking at Copilot, the AI feature, of course, built into Microsoft 365, one of the key exercises you need to go through, first of all, before you start deploying Copilot, is making sure that your corporate data is in a really good place, that the privacy and the security rules are set up, the permissions rules are set up properly, so that people can only access the information that they should be able to access. And advanced information protection can really help with that as well. So if you're thinking about deploying Copilot, it's definitely worth having a little look at this AOP and seeing how that can help with your Copilot deployment. Cloud App Discovery. So this is a tool within the Business Premium package that allows you to identify what applications are being used on the devices that are also being used to access work stuff. Okay, and it helps you understand something called the shadow IT risk. And shadow IT is basically, this is where people are using personal devices to access your corporate information. So it could be laptops or phones, whatever. But yeah, that's what shadow IT is. It's devices that you don't necessarily have control over that are being used to access your work stuff, which of course then poses a little bit of a risk. So with Cloud App Security, one of the things it does, if you look towards the bottom left-hand side of this screenshot, it's a bit small, but hopefully you can see it. You can see a list of different applications that are installed on devices that are being used for work stuff. And right at the top of that list is Google Drive, which is interesting because I can see beneath that is OneDrive. And if you go a bit further down, there's also SharePoint. So to me, it looks like this organization really wants its users to be using Microsoft applications to share documents and files and everything else around. So does that mean that Google Drive's there just because it's people sharing personal information, or potentially could people be sharing work information on Google Drive? And of course that would be bad because we don't have management over Google Drive, and so if people start sharing stuff on Google Drive, then we don't know who it's being shared with, who's getting access to it. So we might put a rule in place saying we don't want people to use Google Drive. Now, if you started enforcing that on people's personal devices, that might be a problem. So you probably need to have a sort of two-tier approach here. You might block Google Drive on corporately owned devices, but you might also have some sort of business process instead that makes, just to kind of reinforce the messaging to your employees that if they're going to be sharing work information, they really shouldn't be doing it on Google Drive, and that will break all sorts of different procedures. But they should be using OneDrive and SharePoint and the Microsoft applications that's been provided to them. So it's just interesting how you can kind of get visibility into the different applications that are being used. Every now and then you might get an application appearing on that list which is a bad one. Like I mentioned, file sharing applications or BitTorrent downloading applications. There's an application on there which is something called Mega, about halfway down that list. And that's a file sharing application that's kind of used to share all sorts of kind of like malicious and dodgy material. So it wouldn't be too unreasonable to say if you're using on a device, we don't want you accessing any work information at all on that device. And using conditional access, you can set up those sorts of rules as well. If you're using Mega, that means that your device is basically blacklisted. We're not going to let you access any corporate information on that device. So something to be aware of, and again, quite a useful utility. Securing and managing devices. So back in the day, we used to have something called MDM, Mobile Device Management. And basically what that is if you had a corporately issued device, your company had the ability to enroll that device into their environment. And if that device was enrolled, then the organization would have the ability to provision certain settings to that device, be Wi-Fi connection settings with certificates, or maybe corporate applications, or other sort of settings like that. They could actually configure. They could actually over the air send down to those devices. If that device was then lost or stolen, your company would have the ability to wipe all information from that device. Now, that's great for corporately owned devices, but for BYOD, bring your own device, or employee-owned devices, that's probably not going to be a great solution, because most people with their own devices wouldn't necessarily want their company to have full control of that device. So with mobile application management, or MAM, what we're able to do is basically control the corporate applications on that device, but not the device as a whole, if that makes sense. So rather than the whole device being enrolled, we can basically just set some rules around the corporate applications on that device. And what you can do with Intune is essentially set up, it's almost like a separation of data on that personal device. So people can continue to use their personal device, their personal applications as they did previously, but with mobile application management, you're organization has a level of control over the work applications that are used on that device. So you can see here we've got the managed apps or the work apps and the personal apps at the bottom of that screenshot. And they don't have to be arranged like they are here. You know, they don't have to be arranged with work stuff in one area and personal stuff in another area. They could be all over the place like your apps probably are on your phone. But only the work applications will be managed, and anything that's personal won't be touched by your organization at all. And then there's some additional rules as well. So you could say if somebody opens up a document or copy some text from within an email, they can only paste that into other managed applications. So they copy the text from the email, they can paste it into Word or they can paste it into OneDrive, but they cannot paste it into a personal application. They can't paste it into their personal OneDrive or Google Drive or their personal email account. So there's that kind of separation between personal applications and corporately owned applications on those personally owned devices. And this is all done with Intune, like I said before. Then if that device is lost or stolen, the company has the ability to remove access to all of the corporate apps, but it doesn't touch anything that's in that personal application section. So it gives your employees a bit of extra peace of mind around their company having access to stuff that's on their personal phone. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, Defender. So this is where we start looking at some of the kind of antivirus functionality that's included within Business Premium. So Defender really gives you that enterprise grade protection. Like I mentioned before, some of the largest organizations in the world, in fact, Microsoft themselves are a customer, if you like, of Defender. And it really is that top grade, top class, enterprise grade protection that protects you against ransomware and other cyber threats. So yeah, really quite a powerful tool that you'll get access to. It's nice and easy to use. It's quick to set up. There are wizard-based onboarding processes. There's out-of-the-box policies that you can implement. And as we go through these next few slides as well, you'll see what the dashboards look like within Defender. And it's really quite a nice, intuitive system to get working. And it's cost-effective as well. So this functionality that we're about to see is bundled into the Business Premium licensing bundle, but it's also available as a separate standalone product as well. So if you're on Business Standard and you don't want any of that other functionality we've just talked about, then there's also an option just to add Defender for Business as a standalone product on top of your Business Standard license as well. Okay, so traditional antivirus comparisons to Microsoft Defender for Business. Traditional antivirus only protects against a fraction of your business. So potentially, the way that some traditional antivirus programs work is they kind of wait for a virus to happen somewhere. They wait for something to happen, and then they apply updates and patches to their antivirus software. That means it starts detecting for that vulnerability. But with Microsoft Defender, because of that huge scope it has, that huge ability it has to access all of that data around the world, it can be a little bit more proactive than some of the traditional antivirus applications can be. So if you're using Defender, there's a much higher chance that you're going to be protected against any of these threats, especially any of these early emerging threats. So you kind of get that extra layer of protection from using Defender that maybe some traditional antivirus applications can't quite offer. Protecting an endpoint is hard, whether it's a laptop or a mobile device, whatever it is. Potentially, you might have different agents or different applications running on your laptop to try and prevent malware attacks or phishingware attacks or ransomware attacks or anything else that you can see here. And some organizations have different agents or different applications or different services running on their devices to try and protect against all of these different things. So they've got one agent or one service that's running to protect against, I don't know, what can we see here? Attack surface reduction, or to help with attack surface reduction, or to help with vulnerability patching, or they might have something else for asset discovery. So you might have all of these different processes, these different services running on your laptop, which is complicated because there's lots of stuff going on which means it's hard for your IT team to administer because they need to be on top of all of these different processes. It can cost quite a lot because none of these services, or probably not many of these services, are provided for free. You're paying for them, and actually it can have an impact on the performance of the device as well. You can imagine having all of these services, all of these processes running to protect that device. That can take up quite a bit of the CPU usage on the device and can have some sort of performance impact. And this slide's a little bit out of date, but it kind of gives you an insight into all of the different vendors that are out there. So if you're looking to find a vendor to help you with your infrastructure security or your endpoint security or your application security, you could go through the process of picking out one of the vendors from each of these different sections. And you can see how that would get quite complicated. Just on this slide, you might have, I don't know, 15 different vendors helping you to protect your devices and your infrastructure and your endpoints. So yeah, it's quite a complex landscape. But with Defender, we have the ability to protect across all of our different devices, all of our servers, whether it's Windows or Linux or even Mac OS devices, Android or iOS devices, if we're using Intune as well. And of course, we have the ability to protect our virtual desktops, whether that's with Windows 365 or with Azure Virtual Desktops. So Defender helps us protect against everything. So protecting an endpoint is hard becomes protecting an endpoint was hard. So instead of having all of those different services and processes and applications running, you can now just use Defender for Business, and it's that single point that gives you that level of protection across your whole organization on all your different devices, providing that extra layer of security. So you can see what one of the biggest benefits is of moving over to Business Premium is that huge reduction in complexity. There's all of those, hundreds of vendors competing in all of those different spaces, and you might choose the best in class for each of the different ones. But if you move over to Microsoft Defender for Business, you're not sacrificing any of the functionality that might be in some of those vendors. Like I said before, Microsoft is top grade, enterprise grade, top of the class across the whole spectrum here. And it really just reduced that complexity, both from a licensing point of view and an administration point of view as well, and a cost point of view. So rather than having to pay for all of those different applications, all those different services, it's all included within Microsoft 365 Business Premium with Microsoft Defender for Business. And again, another industry analyst report. This one's from IDC, and it shows Microsoft up there on its own in the top right, which is that's the ideal place to be. And this is kind of, I think, here really just to kind of show you that it genuinely is top of class, best in breed. There might be some other names on this screen here that you recognise, Sophos and CrowdStrike and Trend Micro and McAfee and all of these really well-known antivirus providers, but it's Microsoft which is on its own up there in that leader section. So again, don't feel like you're going to be sacrificing quality of products if you move from something else to Microsoft to provide this functionality. Okay, so we're going to have a little look now at how Defender for Business works and the different phases it kind of goes through and some of the functionality that's included in Defender for Business. So we have the threat vulnerability management, we have the ability to reduce our attack surface, we have the ability to do some endpoint detection and response as well, and there's also the ability to automatically investigate or even fix any problems that are identified. So that automation is great. It doesn't necessarily just wait for the IT person to come in and see there's been a problem. It can actually automatically put some processes in place to fix any issues that are detected. And we're going to go through these 4 stages: the identify stage, the protect stage, the detect and response stage, and then the recovery stage. Okay, so starting with the identify stage, this is where effectively what we're doing is identifying, assessing, and remediating endpoint weaknesses, and that's pivotal to managing devices and reducing organizational risk across your business. So before there's been any sort of issue here, Defender is going away and helping us to identify any parts of our estate which might be at threat. So threat and vulnerability management helps to reduce your exposure by discovering vulnerabilities such as unpatched software, and any misconfigurations that you have within your system as well. And you can see here it gives you nice little scores on your dashboard. So here our exposure score is 61, which sounds to me like that's pretty hard, but it'll actually give you a breakdown of what that means as well. So it will give you some recommended remediation tasks, and you can see some things over on the right hand side there as well about some of the tasks that you could maybe complete in order to reduce that exposure score and get it nice and low. So as an administrator, this is a really nice dashboard that you can come to. You can see what the top priorities are, where the biggest risks are, and you can put actions in place to try and reduce those risks and stop things from ever becoming a problem. We then move on to the protect stage, and here what we're doing is we're looking at maybe reducing our attack surface. Basically what that means is if there are applications that are not being used, or if there are features or maybe physical entry points like USB ports that aren't being used, we could maybe disable them on people's devices. A big way that viruses make onto people's machines is somebody picking up a USB stick they found on the floor somewhere, and they're going to stick it in their laptop and see what's on it just in case there's anything interesting. But that could mean that potentially malicious stuff could get onto that person's device. So you could, in theory, disable USB ports. Other things might be, if you could have, macros can be used to create malicious processes as well. So you could have rules in place here that disable macros. All these different sorts of things you can do to reduce that attack surface. And again, you'll get recommendations made to you on the dashboard that you can see here. So attack surface reduction rules. It's got things like block executable content from email client and from webmail, that sort of stuff. So Defender's helping us to, like I say, reduce that attack surface, reduce the risk. And then we have that next generation protection that helps us to block and tackle sophisticated threats and malware. So Defender for Business includes that next generation protection to help us catch all sorts of emerging threats. So again, you'll get nice little dashboards which your administrators can use, and it helps them to identify what potential threats are and put rules in place to mitigate against these threats. With endpoint detection and response, so while Defender is designed to prevent threats, there is of course the chance that something could sometimes get through. Many businesses need additional security to handle a threat that does get through, or what we can consider to be called like a post-breach protection. So in the dashboard here, you can get alerts that provide a clear picture of exactly what has happened, if there's been some sort of threat, what's happened, what devices and users are involved, and you can maybe remove those devices from the corporate network, or you can put in place adequate responses. So that could be shutting down devices, shutting down different servers potentially, or disabling user accounts even. This person's been a threat. We don't want them to have access to anything else. And again, you'll get a nice little dashboard which shows you all of these different risks and a severity score here. So the ones we can see here are mainly low, with a couple of little medium ones as well. So that kind of live response to anything that happens. And then finally, the recovery phase. So in addition to that defense stage previously, the detection and response phase, within Defender, there's also the automated investigation and remediation as well. So Defender for Business doesn't simply alert you to a breach and wait for an administrator to act on it. It will automatically start shutting down or isolating devices as quickly as possible to avoid the problem spreading, to avoid a calamity within your organization. Okay, so they get that kind of automation process in there as well. So in Defender, we have enterprise grade, top of class product that you're able to deploy, and it's included in Business Premium, of course. It's easy to use. It's everything all under that one banner, rather than having all of those different applications for all of those different tasks where you need to learn how they all work. It is cost effective, especially if you consider the cost of all those other applications you might currently be using. So like I mentioned a bit earlier, do the maths exercise, work out how much the cost increase is to move from Business Standard to Business Premium, and then compare that cost to all of the costs you're paying for antivirus and for device management and for multi-factor authentication and all these other different sorts of things as well. So literally do the sums and see what you can save. And I'm sure, again, Kick ICT will be very happy to go through that exercise with you and help you to identify areas where you can potentially make huge savings here. It's top rated. We saw some of the analyst reports, and it's flexible. That means you can either buy it as part of the business premium bundle, or if you just wanted to use Microsoft Defender and not some of the stuff we talked about earlier, you can just buy Microsoft Defender as a standalone add-on to your business standard license. Okay, so in summary, here are some of the common challenges that SMBs have to deal with. So the ability to control sensitive data, remove access to employees who maybe leave the company or who have lost a device, vulnerable to threats like ransomware. They want to allow employees to use their own devices, but they need to make sure that your corporate information is being kept safe. Lots of people are paying potentially more than they need with all these different third-party security solutions to protect against things like antivirus and device management. And with Business Premium, we answer a lot of those problems. We can fix a lot of those challenges, securing devices and applications and endpoints by using things like Intune, defending against cyber threats by using things like Advanced Threat Protection and Defender, enabled secure remote access to corporate information, whether that's on mobile devices or whether you're using Azure Virtual Desktops to access those applications. The protection of identities with multi-factor authentication, and the ability, of course, to remotely wipe business data if somebody's device is lost or stolen, or if that person leaves the organization. Okay, and then just to recap, here's the difference between Business Standard and Business Premium. And the one big difference is all that comprehensive security functionality that's included within Business Premium that you don't get within Business Standard. So it looks like 5 little small things there, but as you can see, with me talking over the last 50 minutes or so, there's quite a lot included in that Business Premium bundle. And just to reiterate some of the key points once more, the ability to secure devices, the ability to protect business data with Azure Information Protection, the ability to defend against cyber threats with SafeLink, Safe Attachments, that Advanced Threat Protection, the ability to deploy multi-factor authentication and conditional access rules, and then Microsoft Defender for Business, which gives you that real top-level kind of antivirus protection within your organization. How are we doing for time? Bang on 3 o'clock. Look at that. So that wraps up everything I need to talk about. I haven't seen anything on the Q&A. Ian, I'll let you know if there's any questions that have come in. If not, then that is all from me. Thank you very much. If you have any questions about anything we've discussed, then please feel free to reach out to Ian, and his email address is on the screen for you there.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, literally 2 minutes to spare. There was a couple of questions just in the chat window, so I've given them both a kind of quick, high-level response to each. But for those attendees, more than happy to have a conversation and kind of widen the discussion on each of those questions. Thanks, Andy. Certainly appreciate your time. Very insightful. I think insightful for both clients with Business Premium that maybe don't realise what's within the subscription that they're paying for. And certainly for those maybe just on basic and standard security, should be everything as per your presentation. Just before we close the call down, I'd like to thank Bethany and our marketing team for organising and managing the webinar platform, and certainly just to the wider audience. Thank you very much. Appreciate you giving us an hour out of your day, and I hope there was some value out of the presentation that Andy ran through. And as I said there, a thank you from us all. Direct contact details for myself is there should you want to reach out. And as we close the call down, we will follow this recording up and send it out to all attendees and everyone that had registered. So thanks again. Got a minute to spare, and unless there's any kind of burning questions, I'll close the call down in 30 seconds. Thank you very much.